Good evening and welcome to the sixth and last in our series Embers and Sparks. My name is Eric Walker and it's my pleasure to be with the Orkney International Science Festival team hosting this pre-festival session. I'm joined by our guest speaker today, Dr Maria Pia Casarini. Pia is well qualified to be presenting this evening's talk. She is very well known and respected in the arenas of polar research, geography and the environment. Pia has degrees from Milan Cattolica University and Cambridge University and has researched polar history at the Scott Polar Research Institute. She has made 10 trips to the Earth's 2 poles, 8 to the Arctic and 2 to the Antarctic. Pia participated in the Winter Weddell Sea Project, the first wintering scientific programme of a ship in the Antarctic. She's lectured on ships and at the Genoa Polar Summer School and has served as director of the Zavati Polar Institute in Italy. She took part in the Arctic table of the Italian Foreign Ministry and, news just in, she has been elected President of the Polar Educators International for 2022-23. Amongst other things, she is a Fellow of the Royal Geographical Society. She has many publications on polar history and can often be seen giving interviews to radio and TV programmes. So for tonight, with the centenary of Sir Ernest Shackleton's death and the discovery of the wreck of his ship Endurance, Pia will tell us a remarkable story of fear, hope, resilience, and great leadership. I'd like to ask our audience to play an active part tonight and ask you to please enter your comments and questions in YouTube's live chat, and I will present them to Pia after she's completed her talk. Pia, welcome here tonight. I'm very much looking forward to your talk and the discussion that follows. Pia, over to you. Pia, welcome here tonight. I'm very much looking forward to your talk and the discussion that follows. Pia, over to you.
Thank you very much. Okay. I hear double. Okay. I hear double. Hello, everybody. Today, we celebrate Sir Ernest Shackleton, an extraordinary man and polar explorer. Today, we celebrate Sir Ernest Shackleton, an extraordinary man and polar explorer, in the year that marks the 100th anniversary of his death.
Yeah, I'm going to interrupt you here.
Yes, because I get double.
Just one
That's
minute.
double
Right,
voice.
okay, just listen to what I say. In the background, you have a browser open running the YouTube broadcast or something. So if you can check your other windows on your laptop and close the YouTube browser, then that will sort it. Just sorry for this technical moment, everyone.
Right. Sorry. Okay. If I can. Sorry about this, but
So if you close down any browsers that you have running, not the Zoom meeting, but everything else.
Okay.
Close down any browsers that you have running. I think that looks hopeful. I wonder if I can hear.
Okay, now we go back. Sorry about
That's it. Yes, that's solved the problem.
Marvelous.
Why don't you just take it from where you started to speak
Sure.
and just start again, that'll be good. Sorry to our live viewers. We'll perhaps edit this out for posterity. Oh, and still here.
I still get the double. I still get double.
Yeah, you've got a browser open in the background. You need to close all the browsers that you have open.
Oh my goodness! All of
You must have looked at. You must have the
Mhm.
link that we sent you open to have a look at it or something
Oh, okay.
earlier. You must have looked. You must have the link. I can hear it. I can hear it replaying. I can hear what I can hear the problem. If you close down your slideshow, I can hear it.
Okay. Not us. Okay. I'm not in. Can you hear me now?
Yes. Let's just see if it comes
Okay.
back again.
So the main thing would be to come up on Zoom.
I think you've managed to close the window because I can't hear the double now. Can you hear it?
Yeah, but I can't get at my at my slides now.
Your slides are showing. Your slides are showing. Oh, right. If you don't, are you on a Mac?
There we are. Okay.
Good.
Got it.
Okay.
Got
Okay.
it.
So apologies once again, and I will butt out now as and allow you to just start again, Pia. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you. Right. I'll start again then. So today we celebrate Sir Ernest Shackleton, an extraordinary man and polar explorer, in the year that marks the 100th anniversary of his death. After decades of being largely ignored, in his century, he has become the best known, admired, and loved explorer and protagonist of the heroic age of polar exploration. Charismatic, charming, handsome, brave, loyal, a born leader. Many adjectives fit his multifaceted personality, many of them positive, some not so flattering. But in this talk, I concentrate on one story, which is part of his most famous expedition, known by the name of ship, the Endurance. Interesting to note that this expedition didn't accomplish a single thing out of the original plan, but what happened to it forms one of the most amazing and heroic chapters of polar history, and it's just right that it should be remembered and known by the public at large. Sir Ernest Shackleton was born from an Anglo-Irish family on February 15, 1874, in Kilkee, called Kildare, Ireland, near the village of Athy, where now there is a museum dedicated to him, and where, for the last 21 years, the appropriately called Shackleton Autumn School, a long weekend of scholarly polar lectures, has taken place. After his family moved to England in 1884, in 1887, Shackleton attended Dulwich College in Dulwich as a day student. His early career from the age of 16 was in the Merchant Navy, not as prestigious as the Royal Navy. After meeting Emily Bowman, 6 years his senior, he wanted to make a name for himself and joined the British National Antarctic Expedition led by Captain Robert Falcon Scott on the Discovery. Shackleton was with Scott and the ship's doctor, Edward Adrian Wilson, in the first unsuccessful attempt to reach the South Pole in December 1902. On the terrible journey, which only achieved 82 degrees 17 minutes south, Shackleton was very ill with scurvy and other ailments, and Scott sent him back to England on a relief ship. Shackleton never forgave Scott for this. But one of the reasons was that their personalities were too different, and Scott didn't want someone who was more popular and loved than he was, someone with a strong personality of a leader who was at ease both with the officers and the crew. Shortly after his return in 1904, Shackleton married Emily Dorman, tried a career in journalism, and was for a while secretary of the Scottish Geographical Society. But his heart was set to organize an expedition of his own to the Antarctic. This is what he did with what became known as the Nimrod expedition, called the British Antarctic expedition, lasted from 1907 to 1909. The most important achievement was that Shackleton reached the position of 88 degrees, 23 minutes south on the 9th of January 1909, only 97 nautical miles from the South Pole. It had required a different kind of bravery to turn back owing to scarce food supplies. He wrote to Emily, "I thought you would have preferred a live donkey to a dead lion." Fame and honors awaited him back in England, including a knighthood, but he was still deeply in debt, had no prospect, and his restlessness, involvement in dubious schemes to make money, and womanizing put strain on his marriage. In 1911, the South Pole was reached, first by the Norwegian explorer Roald Amundsen on December 14, 1911, followed by Captain Scott and his 4 companions on January 17, 1912, during the Terra Nova expedition. They all died on the way back, thus becoming heroes for decades. In a way, Scott's death is the reason why, in the last century, the name of Shackleton was virtually unknown. With the South Pole reached, Shackleton planned a different kind of expedition to explore the entire Antarctic continent. He wanted to reach the coast of the Weddell Sea by ship, set up a base for the rest of the crew, and with 5 companions, dogs, and sledges, cross the unexplored part of Antarctica to the South Pole, this part here. Of course, the route from the South Pole to Scott's base on Ross Island was well known, and Shackleton had already done it. In order to this, he needed a support party called the Transcontinental Party, based on Ross Island, which would come from Australia and with the ship Aurora, and lay depots up to 83 degrees south for his use on the well-known tried and tested route. The name Endurance that Shackleton gave to his ship has an almost prophetic quality to it. How much would the expedition have to endure? But it simply came from Shackleton's family motto, Fortitudine Vincimus, by endurance we conquer. The Imperial Transantarctic Expedition, as it was grandly called, met with great financial difficulties. Generous friends and supporters, together with a grant of £10,000 from the British government, barely allowed the expedition to become a reality. It was the munificent gift of £24,000, over £2 million in today's money, on the part of the Scottish jute magnate, Sir James Caird, that allowed it to happen at all. That was also the beginning of World War I. Shackleton put his ship and the crew at the government disposal, but Churchill, who was the first Lord of the Admiralty, answered with one word to Shackleton's request of advice: proceed. So the ship left London on August 1st, 1914, Plymouth on August 8th, bound for Buenos Aires. A number of repairs were needed. Shackleton joined his ship there, and they left Argentina on October 26th for South Georgia, where they arrived on November 5th. This is the whaling base in South Georgia at Great Beacon. There were 28 men. The whalers, however, had informed Shackleton that the ice was very bad in the Weddell Sea that year. And it so happened that the ship encountered very heavy ice. They were battling with the ice on a daily basis, and they were trying to make for the continent. They became stuck, then they got freed, and then they got stuck again. Unfortunately, on January 18, the ship stopped in the evening, and on the morning of the 19th, the position at 76 degrees 34 south, 31:30 west, the ice had closed behind her, and the Endurance never reached the Weddell Sea coast again. From then on, she kept drifting with the ice. We have here the iconic image of Endurance, the ice that was photographed with flash in the polar night. During these months, the ship was subjected to strong ice pressure but managed to resist. But the huge forces exerted by the moving ice field began her destruction on October 27. The story of the expedition thus became the story of a struggle for survival by Shackleton and his 27 companions. The ship was abandoned. From the end of October, while awaiting a possible ice breakup in the southern summer, where they could take to the seaweed boats, they were forced to set up camp within sight of the Endurance. It was called the Ocean Camp, on the ice in constant motion, subject to the capricious drift over which they had no control. They remained there for about 2 months, also witnessing the progressive breakup and final sinking of the Endurance on November 21st, 1915. Only the 3 boats remained, and these are the names: James Caird, in honor of Sir James T. Caird, the wealthy Scottish youth magnate who had donated £24,000. The Dudley Docker, that was also a donation by an industrialist of Birmingham that had donated £10,000. And Stanton Wills, in honor of Janet Stanton Wills, which was an heiress who had donated a generous but undisclosed amount of money. Here we would like to, so an attempt to move camp, dragging the boats at the end of December, did not succeed. And here I would like to introduce you to a set of paintings by the Italian artist Paola Folicaldi. So, when I was the director of the Zavati Italian Polar Institute in Fermo, I met her and asked her if she was interested in painting this expedition. The result has been a masterpiece of scenes and portraits, and you can read the full story in the article that Mary Leonard wrote for the magazine Frontiers, called Painting the Shackleton Story. And here is an example of her wonderful interpretation of the photograph by Frank Hurley. As I said, the move forward towards the open sea did not succeed. After a week of exhausting efforts, they had progressed only 10 kilometers as the crow flies. On December 29, therefore, Shackleton decided to halt the march and established a new camp that he called appropriately Patience Camp. When the ice started melting and moving, Shackleton gave the order to get to the boats on April the 9th, 2016. And even the cat, Mrs. Chippy, had to be sacrificed. And from now on, we can only rely on Paola Folicaldi's interpretation to follow the story. Here are the boats taken to the water as she imagines. It was a terrible time. They had very little food. The cold was numbing, the darkness encompassing, and Shackleton was afraid of missing the islands to the northwest, a fact that would have killed everybody. Amid continuing danger, storms, and icebergs, after 100 miles of navigation, on April 14, we can see here the terrible danger that they were. There's a ship sinking. This was April the 9th, and there were various islands that the drift might have taken them to. But if they missed these islands, it would have been open ocean and sure death. So anyway, they were very lucky, and they managed to find an island called Elephant Island. But it was in the South Shetland, a remote mountainous island exposed to winds and storms, with only a narrow and uncomfortable strip of beach. By the time, more than half the men were delirious and disabled by the ordeal. For this modern picture of Elephant Island and the photos that will follow, I acknowledge Martin Gray from Orkney, with whom I shared a lecture at a previous Orkney Science Festival, and he very kindly let me use his own photographs. Thank you, Martin. We see here an historical map of the drifting of the Endurance. If you consider that they came from South Georgia, and then the ship got blocked by the ice and near the Weddell Sea coast, and then this was the crazy drifting on the ship until well, the ship sank, they abandoned boats, and they eventually reached Elephant Island. But the only way that Shackleton found to save his men was to seek relief. Nobody would have ever known that they were on such a remote island. So what he needed to do was to return to South Georgia, his last port of departure with the Endurance, which was a home of a thriving Norwegian whaling industry, as we have seen. The carpenter, Harry McNeish, raised the sides of the James Caird, which was the largest boat, by about a foot using wood from the other boats, strengthened the keel, and made a makeshift deck of wooden canvas. And then he sealed his work with oil paint and seal blood from a 20-foot boat. The other boats are here on Hospitable Beach. They were upturned and turned into some kind of accommodation. Here again, we have a painting by Paolo Riccardi that tells the story. Just to remind you of this ordeal, this is a chronology starting from the 5th of December, 1914, when Endurance leaves South Georgia, frozen ice, January 1915. Endurance declared a winter station, so Royal Navy rules didn't apply anymore. Endurance abandoned on the 27th of October, Ocean Camp. The Endurance sank, Patience Camp. The boats were launched, and the arrival on Elephant Island. They had even to move place on Elephant Island because when they arrived, they were too exposed to the elements until the 24th of April, when there was a departure of the James Caird. Now, the crew of the James Caird presented a certain problem because it wasn't easy for Shackleton to choose the 6 people that he would, 5 that he would take with him. Frank Worsley was the captain from New Zealand. He was absolutely necessary because of his faultless navigation that would make a difference between life and death. The Irish Tom Crean had been on 4 Antarctic expeditions, and he begged Shackleton to let him go. Frank Wild was Shackleton's second in command. He would have loved to go with the boss, as they called Shackleton, but somebody like him, unflappable, capable, eternally optimistic, was necessary to keep the 21 men under control on Elephant Island. The choice of the other 3 companions, Harry McNeish, the carpenter, Tim McCarthy, and John Vincent Abel, seamen, were dictated by the need to keep potentially disruptive individuals away from the camp, although the carpenter McNeish would be very useful. Shackleton decided to take only provisions for 4 weeks. He reasoned that if it hadn't reached South Georgia after 4 weeks, they were all going to die, so there was no point in taking more provisions. This is Frank Worsley, again taken from the photograph by Frank Hurley, Thomas Crean, and John Vincent. So here we see that Shackleton leaves on the 24th of April, helped by people. You see how terribly small was this boat to cross the wildest ocean, the Southern Ocean, on Earth. We see here from this very nice map made by somebody at the Polytechnic of Milan, the route between Elephant Island and South Georgia. There's absolutely only open sea, of the wildest sea that has no land around to stop it. So they were really risking their lives completely. We see, as again, we have no photographs, no images, nothing of this heroic and incredible journey. We have the diaries, and Paola Folicaldi was inspired by the wave. This was the highest wave that they encountered, to the point that Shackleton thought it was actually clear sky. This Paola is very interesting. She says that she started putting the boat in, and then the boat became smaller and smaller. And in the end, she decided to take the boat off the painting completely. This is what Shackleton said in. Sorry. What Shackleton said, which was, you can read it, but I'll just say, I was at the tiller at midnight. I noticed a line clear sky between the south and southwest. I called to the other men that the sky was clearing, and then realized that what I had seen was not a rift in the clouds, but a white crest of an enormous wave. In 26 years experience, I've never seen a wave so gigantic. It was a mighty upheaval of the ocean. I shouted, for God's sake, hold on, it's got us. Came a moment of suspense, which seemed to last for hours. We felt our boat lifted and flung forward like a cork in breaking surf. We were in a seething chaos of torch water, but somehow the boat lived through it. We bailed with the energy of men fighting for life, flinging the water over the sides with every receptacle which came into our hands. After 10 minutes of uncertainty, we felt the boat renew her life beneath us. She floated again and ceased to lurch drunkenly, as though dazed by the attack of the sea. The cooking stove was floating about in the bottom of the boat. What it doesn't say in this particular incident is that also the water, the tanks that they had, became corrupted with seawater. So they were basically drinking seawater. Very, very, very dangerous for them. And this is a summary that Shackleton wrote later on, when he said that the tale of the next 16 days, that is to say the ones on the James Caird, is one of supreme strife among heaving water, for the subantarctic ocean fully lived up to its winter evil reputation. They took spells of 2 hours each at the till. He's talking in the third person. Cooking food was an ordeal, cramped in our narrow quarters, etc. You can read it by yourself. There were gales. There were no dry places on the boat. They were cold, sore, and anxious. I don't think any of us got the taste of salt out of our mouths. Skin frostbites, and the heavy surge of the sea was an enemy to be watched and circumvented. And in fact, they said that some other time, another place, that the only thing that they had was wet or damp and wet. So they never really got dry during that time. Now, eventually, so we don't have, as I said, any illustration. So after the encountering the wave on the 5th of May, they managed on May the 8th, just 3 days later, land was sighted. The wonderful navigation of Frank Worsley had really managed to get them more or less to safety. But unfortunately, all the whaling stations were on the north side, and they landed on the south side, and there was no way that they could go around and face the raging sea again. So they stopped absolute by chance in a very exposed part, just for one night, because they were totally exhausted. And the following day, they moved the boat again and managed with enormous difficulty to take it into this little cove. Here, Shackleton had to take stock, because they found, luckily, a little spring, and so they managed to actually drink clear, unsalted water for the first time in weeks. And but there were 3 men that were absolutely destroyed. which were in fact McNeish, the carpenter, and the two sailors. Shackleton was also exhausted. So they spent 10 days recuperating. In fact, the James Caird was turned over and made into some kind of shelter, and they call it Pigotti Camp from David Copperfield. And we can see after that, Shackleton had a real choice because he couldn't really wait for that long. So on May 19, Shackleton, Worsley, and Crean, who were the ones that were in a better physical condition, made an attempt to cross the mountains of South Georgia. This had never been done before. So it was again an amazing feat of Shackleton to save his men. And of course, there were no maps. This was later Shackleton tried to reconstruct. They went down Possession Bay, or anyway, in sight of Possession Bay, but there were no whaling stations there. So they had to come back and then back. And then they went down for a waterfall. And eventually, after 36 hours of nearly continuous climbing, where Shackleton practically never slept and told his people that they were only going to sleep for half an hour, but he let them sleep for longer. They actually managed to reach the whaling station at Stromness, not the one in Grytviken where they had left, but the one in Stromness. And it was kind of crazy because the manager was called. They were just in rags, looking absolutely shattered. And they could not believe it was Shackleton. They said, but Shackleton has been dead for 4 years. And the first question that Shackleton asked was, is the war over? And unfortunately, they said no. Millions have been killed. Europe is mad. The world is mad. Immediately, a ship was prepared to go and rescue the 3 men left in Kilcockham Bay, and the James Caird was also recovered. But Shackleton immediately began to organize the rescue of the 22 comrades that remained on Elephant Island. This story usually gets brushed off, saying, "Oh well, he tried 4 times, and at the 4th time he rescued everybody." Well, I think that is a fitting homage to Sir Ernest Shackleton to actually tell you the detail of the attempts that Shackleton tried to rescue his men on Elephant Island. The first attempt was with a steel whale catcher and failed on account of that the ice would have damaged her. The ship then took Shackleton to Port Stanley, to the Falkland Islands, 700 nautical miles away, where he hoped to find another ship. The Uruguayan government sent him the trawler Instituto de Pesca 1, which arrived at Port Stanley by June the 10th. He was really worried. He had left, let me remember, on the 24th of April. The ship too was forced to turn back by the ice. Increasingly anxious, Shackleton traveled to Punta Arenas, to Chile, on an English mail ship. Then he rented a wooden schooner Emma. The Chilean government offered him a small steel-hulled steamer called the Yelcho to tow her. They left on July 14, and the weeks and the months were passing. The Yelcho was forced to turn back by a storm. The Emma failed to reach Elephant Island, and with a broken engine, she arrived at Port Stanley on August the 8th. The Yelcho returned to Port Stanley to pick up the Emma. Shackleton returned with her to Punta Arenas. The Chilean government again granted him the use of the Yelcho, which set off on August 25th, by now in the middle of the Antarctic winter. Captain Luis Pardo managed to reach Elephant Island on August the 30th, 1916, to save the entire crew. They only managed in 1 hour to abandon the ship, to abandon the station on Elephant Island. And they went straight onto the Yelcho. And after a few days, they went to Punta Arenas in Chile. It's kind of amusing in a way that Shackleton told them, don't shave for the photograph of the rescue. We want you to look as wild as you can be. So that's the photo of the wild people. And then after that, they went back to Europe. And sadly, two of the crew that had survived this amazing ordeal actually died in the First World War. And this is Paola Folicaldi's interpretation of the crew of the Endurance, and Shackleton didn't lose a single man in this part of the expedition. The other story of the southern part, the support party, is a different story. But since we are talking about the James Caird, this is really what you need to know right now. And again, courtesy of Martin Gray, there was a monument to Captain Louis Esparto that has been erected on Elephant Island, a fitting homage. What happened to the little James Caird? For many years, because when Shackleton came back, the world, apart from the World War, which was still on, but in Britain, the hero was Captain Scott, who had died coming back from the South Pole. So Shackleton and his achievement were really not considered at all, proven by the fact that the James Caird wasn't really considered a very important boat. It was kept on the rooftop of Selfridges in about 1919, was on show, then spent years and years after in deposits in sheds, etc., until Dulwich College decided that it was actually worth exhibiting it and took it in. In the old setting, this was with stone. All these stones here actually came from South Georgia, which is quite an amazing thing. But then later on, Dulwich College, which is a fairly rich college school, created a science department, and they moved the James Caird in this very flashy new setting. I must say, I found the old setting much more true to the way that the James Caird was really. On top of that, the James Caird Society was founded in 1992, and it meets twice a year at Dulwich College for lectures and usually a very good dinner. Its president is the Honorable Alexandra Shackleton, Sir Ernest Shackleton's granddaughter, daughter of his third and youngest son, Edward Shackleton, Edward Lord Shackleton, I have to say. And also there's this very nice story written by one of the founders, Mr. Harding Dunnett, one of the founders of the James Caird Society. Sadly, he died a few years ago. I would certainly recommend to everybody reading South the story of Shackleton, because these few words that I said really don't convey how incredible this expedition really was and what an amazing leader Shackleton was. And we see also that Shackleton has been picked up in recent times as an example of leadership. So this journalist, Stephanie Caparel, that I know because she's a member, like myself, of the Society of Women Geographers in Washington, D.C., she wrote this, which is used by motivation people that teach leadership. So that's also an interesting twist on Shackleton's life. But Shackleton was actually very restless anyway, and he wasn't particularly happy to stay, he just basically loved the sea. So he tried another expedition financed by Rowett, who was a newspaper owner. in 1921-22. And the quest was still at anchor in Great Viken when on 5th of January, Sir Ernest Shackleton died at 2:50 a.m. local time, which we calculated was 5:50 Greenwich Mean Time. When it was anchored in Stromness, it would have been 48 only a month and a bit later. This is the last sentence that he wrote in his diary. In the darkening twilight, I saw a lone star hover gem-like above the bay. There's another story coming up here, which is Shackleton's cabin. On top of the quest, they had put a superstructure, which was a wooden building, which was Shackleton's cabin. This is the cabin when he died. That photo was taken in 1921, and I thank Gerald Farrell from Ireland for the photograph. And this is the cabin that has a story of its own, which will be quite interesting to talk about more in detail at some stage in the future. And this cabin is now being taken to the Shackleton Museum in Athy, where a new extension is going to be built to house it. So there's a very interesting story about the cabin. And of course, how can we not follow with the end of this, which is 2022, the expedition Endurance 22, organized by the Falklands Maritime Heritage Trust, and with the cost of $10 million, sailed from Cape Town in early February and arrived in the search area 10 days later. It accounted for errors in navigation by Frank Worsley when he gave the position where the Endurance had sunk. But they actually found that using a battery-powered submersible, amazingly, that the Endurance body hull was still in a very, very good condition. So they only took photographs and examined around because it's a historical monument marked with preservation under the terms of the Antarctic Treaty. So nothing was touched and no artifacts were removed. It's also not very easy to reach because it lies in 4,000 meter depth of ocean. So that's a really exciting new crown in the story of the Endurance. And now, as very kindly Eric said, I've been recently nominated as president of Polar Educators International. So anything to do with polar education and conference, etc., is fitting for this very good network that promotes educating people in general, not just students. So these are if you want to have a look at our website, I would appreciate it very much. And for the moment, I say that I finished with my presentation, so I stop sharing, and I back to base.
Pia, that was absolutely wonderful. You told a tale there. I got so engrossed in it that I forgot my job is to listen and harvest questions and think of questions.
Well, I'm glad.
It was wonderful, wonderful, wonderful.
Thank you
The pictures you painted, not just of Shackleton, of quite a few of his men there, was wonderful.
Yes.
I'll tell you, in the beginning there, it sounds like Shackleton was totally hacked off, having been sent off by Captain Scott.
Absolutely.
Do you think that was a key driver in his determination to succeed in future expeditions?
That certainly must have piqued his interest and sort of show him, see what I can do, because it was unfair. I mean, Shackleton might have been very ill during that trail, getting back from that botched attempt to the South Pole, but The others were not in such a better shape anyway, but there's already suspicion about this conflict of personalities. But there was actually a very practical point. Shackleton wanted to marry Emily Dorman, and Emily was 6 years older than him, so he couldn't really make her wait all that much, and he needed money. And he thought, if I become a polar hero, money will come my way. Well, having been sent back more or less, not in disgrace, but, with a question mark about his ability, certainly made him feel, okay, I want to show you. And unfortunately, with Shackleton, he was always short of money. Because any expedition to the Antarctic costs a fortune, as we all know.
I picked up very much, I mean, this is a very British thing. Shackleton definitely didn't appear to be part of the British establishment, which must have made things pretty difficult for him. He was fighting a lot of fronts, and just must have been awfully difficult. I noticed that a couple of his big sponsors were actually industrialists of the time. That was the new money. That was the start of what eventually became a different establishment. But that sounds how he found another way to get sponsorship.
Scott was the darling of the Royal Geographical Society. So any money, any official money, any endorsement would only go to Scott. And so Shackleton didn't have a single hope to get any public money, ever. There was also something that I didn't go into in my lecture, but it was a point that Scott considered that specific area, base in the Antarctic, as his own. So and Shackleton had agreed that he would go along the southern part of Antarctica, the Ross ice shelf, and search for another place when he did the Nimrod in 1907. But he couldn't find anywhere to moor his ship. In fact, if he had done like Amundsen did, in 1910, he was, he dared to just put the ship in the open sea, basically, and build a hut in a place where it could have been swept off. But he would have saved, as Amundsen did, he would have saved about 60 nautical miles of closeness to the South Pole. So, anyway, Shackleton actually in the end went back to Scott's huts. And that was another reason for Scott really never wanted to have anything to do with it.
Yeah, it's interesting that there's a comment come in as well. It was Scott who lost his life and the lives of his men. He became the hero, the darling of the Royal Geographic Society, as you say, and an establishment and a Royal Navy man. He became such a hero as compared to Shackleton, who preserved the lives of his men. Yet he was conveniently sidelined, it's
totally. Well, I think it was also the fact that we were in the middle, in fact, of the First World War. Now, how many people were dying during the war? So, there was this Scott, the quintessential British hero that died in the line of duty or whatever. You need about 2 or 3 lectures on Scott about what he did, but anyway. So Shackleton comes back, and basically his expedition was a failure. Because he wanted to cross the Antarctic continent. He didn't even get close to the Antarctic continent anyway. And so however heroic he was in his efforts, recognition didn't come at all.
Failed his main mission. Yeah, there's a comment coming in again. Is there a kind of parallel between Shackleton and John Rae, and that they were both from outside the establishment, both were able to survive, so they had the raw determination and survival drive that people from outside establishment often do have, you know?
Well, exactly. I mean, in Britain, I'm from from Italy, so I shouldn't really judge the British character. But it seems that failures, noble failures, and amateur failures actually are better appreciated than professionality. You
Mm.
couldn't understand why John Ray was never given a knighthood, just as a very simple recognition. John Ray was, he went native, so he wasn't, he had dogs, poor little dogs.
Yeah.
That's un-British,
Yeah, but he survived on them.
Exactly.
But he could eat them. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, but why did Scott become a hero? Because he died.
Yeah, well, that's it. When Winston heard that Scott and his party had died, he said, "Oh, he has beaten me." Sorry, somebody's written that quote in the comment section. So,
can I read them too? Am I allowed to?
Well, yeah, of course you can. But
oh yeah, okay,
I'm
right.
just trying to stitch them together. So,
wow, that's quite a lot
yeah.
of them. Yeah.
Yeah, I had. It's actually interesting. You mentioned the First World War because Shackleton's dilemma basically started at the start of the First World War and went, right into, the middle of the Great War, as it's now called. Would that have put any, I don't know what the search and rescue situations down that part of the world at the time, but would that have impacted on the ability or desire for people to go looking for them?
I don't think so. I mean, just to look for who?
To go looking for Shackleton, did people just write Shackleton off, or? Yeah.
Well, they wouldn't know where to look. I mean, and it was the war anyway. I mean, he left as the war started, but nobody would know. I mean, talking of a needle in a haystack, they would have absolutely no clue whatsoever. What I wanted to find out of my notes actually was a comment by, if I can find it, by Amundsen, who was really very keen on Shackleton. And he just said he would be remembered. I haven't got it here, but I can. Oh, yes, there we are. Roald Amundsen paid homage to the British explorer by saying, Sir Ernest Shackleton's name will forevermore be engraved with letters of fire in the history of Antarctic exploration. Yeah. This is what Amundsen said, engraved with letters of fire.
It sounds like he was a like type man, but it's only now that Shackleton is really becoming appreciated for.
Well, it started in about 1980, in the 1980s. In fact, there's a very good book called By Endurance We Conquer. That's the title, by Michael Smith, who's a really excellent polar historian. That I met him in Scott Polar many, many times. And he was making a point that the bane of Scott was Roland Huntford, the journalist that wrote Amundsen and Scott. And of course, he absolutely trashed Scott's reputation to pieces. And then he moved on to Shackleton and really made Shackleton very much a hero. In fact, I remember when I was doing my master's course in Cambridge, Roland Huntford came to give us a lecture. And of course, he was talking about his books. And so there was this kind of thing, because it seemed like his first wife was English, and the second wife was Norwegian. So he was much happier with his second wife. So anything Norwegian was better than English. That's a bit of a sort of anthropological view, if you like.
That's good.
But the point is that also Huntford wrote Shackleton, a big biography of Shackleton. And that was really what turned the tide on Shackleton's opinion, because people who had read them very well researched, apart from a selective use of sources, just started realizing that Shackleton was actually somebody that was worth knowing.
Extra special.
And then it's been absolutely burdening.
Yeah.
And needless to say, I'm delighted that Shackleton has become such a
it's
big.
just fascinating. I'll tell you, Pierre, what I noticed in, see your picture of the Endurance. It doesn't appear to be a very big ship. What I was wondering is, well, one, what type of provisions and rations did they have on that ship? And how, how much did they have? Because they were stuck in the ice for a few months. And then they must have taken provisions on their 3 little boats to get to Elephant Island. So, yeah.
Well, provision-wise, the original plan was to land the bulk of the crew from the ship onto the Antarctic. So they needed, onto the Antarctic continent and the Weddell Sea. So they needed to have provisions to survive for at least a year or maybe 2, you never know, when people come back. Then he needed supplies to take with him in the trek from the Weddell Sea down to the South Pole and down to 83 South, because the party that was supposed to leave depots coming from Tasmania was only going to 83 South. So from 90 South Pole to 83, also he had to carry his supplies. So there was plentiful supplies. And that's why they managed to survive quite well for over almost 2 years on the ice.
That makes sense now you've said it like that. And I'll tell you another thing. See, when you showed us the photograph of the unkempt men that had been rescued, they actually looked pretty well nourished, I'd have to say, because they had round, they didn't look gaunt, as I expected.
That was a good point, that in their total lack of luck in ending up in that remote tiny island, which was murder to try and find even a tiny strip of beach to have those upturned boats. But there were plenty of birds. And so when they were there, and actually the other hero that should take a lot of mention is Frank Wild, who was the man, the second in command, who had this unfailing optimism and managed to keep these 21 men stranded on this tiny island optimistic and going. And he would say, get out of bed, do up your parcels, because the boss might be coming today. And also he was the one that got them to kill as many birds, saying, well, we might not need them, but let's just kill them anyway. And so they had actually quite a bit of food and rationing the gas and the petrol and the fuel. They were managing reasonably well.
So he gave them a sense of purpose, going out hunting.
Oh, totally.
And they were successful at it, so it made them feel good about themselves. Good old basic psychology, isn't it?
Again, another fantastic leader.
Yeah. How did they manage to keep warm? You've answered. I get the food now, so that's the birds, because that question came in.
All right.
But how did they keep warm?
Well, what they keep warm with whatever they had. I think they stayed mostly inside these upturned boats.
All right.
Because they only had rags. There was nothing. That anything that they brought in these 3 boats in that perilous journey from the melting ice onto Elephant Island, there was nothing else that they had. In fact, they had to get rid of everything. These wonderful pictures of Frank Hurley. Him and Shackleton went through all these glass plates. He had taken hundreds of pictures. They selected the best 150 and put them at the bottom of the boat. And they actually smashed all the other ones. And people couldn't take anything, even gold coins, gold pounds, sterling.
Yeah.
Shackleton said, chuck them. It's better to take the equivalent in weight of food. So he was absolutely adamant to that.
You
So
know,
they had nothing.
This just stands out. It absolutely stands out from your talk. As Shackleton, he appeared to be very aware of the physical things that his team needed, but also the skill sets, the social, including the social and behavioral skills he, required to survive something as stressful as that. And when the team split, so there was the team that stayed on Elephant Island, and then there was the team that became sailors. They required different skill sets, and he seemed to be aware of how to divvy up those skill sets. I mean, that is tremendous leadership. Tremendous.
Exactly. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, Shackleton has always been adored by his men. But the point was that he had quite a conflict with the carpenter. The carpenter actually threatened a mutiny when they were on the ice cap. And that was something that Shackleton could not counteract. No way. You have to be together. So, and this is a question mark, how he managed to calm down the carpenter. Because the carpenter was just saying, we're all going to die, there's nothing we can do. So he calmly talked to him. This is one version. Another is that he might have actually threatened to kill him if he wasn't becoming, that he was not going to get the morale of the people down. No way. So also because he obviously needed the carpenter on the boat, but it was one of the reasons, probably the main reason, was to get the most troublesome men with him, rather than leaving them for Frank Wilde to deal with, because he was afraid of the morale on the people that stayed. He felt that was ordeal enough.
Yeah, so it's interesting looking at that in modern, when I was, working in distilling management and things, we got behavioral psychology and all about team development and stuff. And I can look at that situation you've just described in the, team forming, storming, norming, performing bit, and I can see all those different elements in it with the education I've had, but he wouldn't have had that at that time. That wouldn't have even existed. He learned that stuff naturally,
Yeah, I think that was why he should really be revered as a great, great leader. It's all very well from Stephanie Caparel to write a book about it. I would advise people to look for that book, because it's very interesting, because she picks up various examples of behavior and turns them into advice for corporate management. And it's quite interesting. But that came instinctively to him.
Yeah.
It was just that person.
Yeah.
There was no motivation meetings or teaching
No. But
time, as you know.
he knew how to motivate or let people, get things out or whatever. His boat crew were under tremendous and constant stress all the time. Yet they appeared to keep their heads, and I'll tell you that navigation. Was that navigation skill? The guy, was it Wolseley?
Worsley, Frank Worsley.
Worsley. That was a tremendous achievement. He didn't go off course very much at all. If when you showed us the.
Well, they would have been dead. And in fact, I couldn't spend 2 hours reading from his diaries that were obviously written afterwards. But the difficulty in taking a longitude fix in those circumstances with no sun, So there wasn't, and there's an amazing description on how complicated it was to create this artificial horizon. If there was a tiny bit of sun, and Shackleton would lie down on the boat and try to shield the instrument while Worsley was taking the reading. I mean, it was just amazing.
Yeah, that's just wonderful. Actually, there's a good comment in this. I think we'll finish it after this one, but it's got, after such a terrible experience over many months, how did the crew adapt to normal day-to-day life again? You know, nowadays, you know, people who've been near death or under long, deep stress, you know, we recognize PTSD. I mean, shell shock
Exactly.
were one at that thing. So how
Well, actually, I haven't personally followed the individual stories. What I know is that two of them, quite a number of them, went straight into war. You know, they were just came back to England, sent to the front.
Yeah.
You know, so that's no time to recover or feel sorry for themselves in any way. I mean, maybe people were different at the time. I don't know. But I know that Tom Crean, this amazing chap who'd been 4 times, basically he is the heroic age of Antarctic exploration. He went back to Ireland and opened a pub called the South Pole. So that was, one way to, and he died in about 1938, I think. And then, of course, Shackleton was totally restless because he just wanted to go back to the Antarctic because he was away from the daily grind of making money, the daily grind of having a family. In fact, it's kind of telling that his wife, Shackleton died on South Georgia. And so they shipped his body to Montevideo with a ship, a whaling ship that was going there. And then in order to be taken to England. And the cable came, said, take him back to South Georgia. His wife said, basically, you can read 2 things here. One is stay there, don't even bother to send him back, or she would be, just understanding the man that she had married, which his life, his heart was in the Antarctic, and so it was fitting that he should be buried there.
It's interesting. Ordinary life for him was a different source of stress that he couldn't actually handle, and yet the life or death type stress, the adventurous stress.
But see, he just was never showing any panic, even if he had every reason to panic. And probably this has been said, it could be this enormous strain of this kind of leadership that really had a bad effect on his heart condition. And, dying at 48 was a kind of, his heart basically gave up. Gave him no whatever. Now, I've only seen Howie's question, which was how Shackleton chose his people, or whether there was special feature he was looking for. Apparently, he was the most incredible lackadaisical person. I mean, he got one of the scientists because he could sing. He got somebody else because he could play the banjo. And, there was really no set way of saying, oh, you can do this, you can do that. He just had this empathy with people. Apparently, this is how he chose his crew.
He just knew. Pia, I'm going to end there. That was enlightening. It was enthralling. I was, as I say, I got completely immersed in it, which is great. I love it when speakers do that to me. Very thought-provoking as well. And really, seriously, thanks very much for that. Can I also thank the audience for actively taking part, and the questions and comments that came in helped me tremendously in having that discussion with you, Pia. And I'm just going to say that now concludes the Embers to Spark series of talks. And I want to hand over to Howie Firth, Director of the Orkney International Science Festival, to say a few words.
Oh, thank you very much, Eric. And first of all, I absolutely endorse what you said about that wonderful presentation. Thank you so much, Pia. We'd like to, I should mention, of course, that you both will be coming back to Orkney for this year's festival. Pia, you're going to be very busy because you're going to tell the story of Frank Worsley, indeed, and we're going to hear about some Orkney connections, both with the town of Stromness and with the island of Edi. And that's going to be on one of the talks. Then you're going across to Hoy and speaking in the Hoy Kirk and joining in a presentation about the Hudson's Bay Company. And you're also going to be meeting up with the John Ray Society for an Arctic afternoon. And I don't know if I've told you this, but there is going to be a talk on the closing evening of the festival. I think I maybe mentioned to Eric. In fact, I think Eric is going to be chairing it. And the title is Shackleton's Dram. So this will be an opportunity for a story. Excellent. When you mentioned the supplies, this is one of the supplies that he took to the Antarctic.
Another story, another good story, yes.
So we'll have that. And overall in the festival, this is the year of stories, indeed, in Scotland. And that's very much one of the themes of the festival. We'll also be looking up to the Arctic and hearing about the Arctic whaling ships and the people who crewed them. And a whole range of stories with the sea very much to the fore. But in the meantime, I'd like to say thanks again, Pia. Thank you again, Eric. And behind the scenes, Swain and John operating everything as smoothly as ever. So to everyone, and one more thing, I should just say that the Science Festival program indeed is not very far away. It's being gradually posted up on the website, and it's only a matter of a week or two before it's announced. So we look forward to that. In the meantime, thank you to everyone.